Well, hello again from the Voices of the Foothills. We're back again today with another interesting person. We have been trailing him for the better part of several months. He's been north, south, east, and west. I don't know whether he's been out of the country or not, but I chased him everywhere until finally I caught him on. He was not on guard at that time. And I got Paul Reid. And I'm sure that name is familiar to all of you who are of a mind to read a book that I still am trying to understand. Paul Reid, thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to chat a little bit about your association with William Manchester. He's holding the book here now, and I'm looking at the book itself. Yeah, I was going to get to the last lion, the old curmudgeon you wrote about, but this was an undertaking, I'm sure, that has been a culmination of your whole life's work. And I'm going to say, how long did it take you to get this book together?
Well, and thank you for having me here. The book is The Last Lion, a biography of Winston Churchill, the third volume in a biography that was begun by William Manchester in 1983. And the second volume came out in 1988. And the third volume is The Last Lion, Winston Spencer Churchill, Defender of the Realm, 1940 to 1965. And this was the third volume that Bill Manchester couldn't complete. He had had 2 strokes. The world was waiting for the third volume. I was waiting for it.
Had you read the first 2?
Oh, of course. I got them for Christmas, 1983 and 1988. And they were on my, my shelf, and they still are. And I see old Christmas photos from 1989 or so, and there are the books on my shelf in a former life, in a former state, in a former town.
Okay. Let me ask you, I'm going to interrupt you from time to time. I hope you don't mind.
No,
okay?
no.
Okay, good deal. How did you become acquainted with Mr. Manchester that led to your finishing his work?
Well, I began at age 46 a new career. I had owned a small industrial manufacturing company up in Boston. I sold that in the late 80s and did freelance writing after that for about 6 years until I took a job at the Palm Beach Post.
But you've been a newspaper man most of your life, right?
No.
That's why I say no.
I've been a newspaper man since I was 46. I'm now 63. Completely different life before then, up in the Northeast outside of Boston. And I always liked writing. I liked history. And I started selling stories after I sold my company, and freelance stories. And I went to Colombia. I had a friend in the Drug Enforcement Administration in Colombia, and he got me in with the Colombian Army chasing Pablo Escobar, and I wrote a story about that for the Miami Herald and the Boston Globe. And the Yugoslav Civil War began. I went over there and did stories.
You were would you call yourself at that time a war correspondent? Because it seemed like you were following the guns.
Well, I would just call myself a freelance writer, but because I had the ability after selling my company, a lot of people want to sell a lot of stories to a lot of newspapers and magazines. And an editor at the Boston Globe told me, Paul, we get 500 stories a week. If you want to sell something to us, go someplace where people aren't going and write what people aren't writing about. Well, the Colombia stories were great in that regard because a lot of journalists wouldn't even go out with the Colombian army. It was dangerous. And
you're talking about Colombia, South America?
Yes.
Okay.
In the jungles down near the Venezuelan border, the flatlands down there, the Rio Negro, and the mountains, beautiful. The Andes from Cali to Medellin are stunning. And so I did 6 or 7 stories out of Colombia with the Colombian National Police hunting Pablo Escobar, and after he was killed, more stories later. In the Northern Ireland, the troubles there, and the Yugoslav Civil War. So I could write about hot topics, literally, and sell the stories.
But so you picked your subjects. I mean, you had no one telling you cover this story or that. You picked your own.
I was self-employed always, my whole life.
You're a very independent person, aren't you?
Yes, I am. My brother and I owned our company, and for many, many years. And so after I sold my half, I could do the freelance work and travel stories. I took my daughters, one to Ireland, riding horses in the northwest of Ireland, a wonderful week-long horsey trip. And I took my other daughter, Georgia, to Scotland because she was a big fan of Rob Roy. Mm-hmm. So we went through the Highlands and Loch Lomond, and I'd sell travel stories and war stories. And it was fascinating. I learned a lot, especially about writing. And I'd always liked history very much since I was a little kid.
Do you think that writing, as you do you think that is a God-given talent to you, or do you think that you can be taught this?
Oh, I think it's taught and work and work and work and work. And in fact, my daughter wrote me an email last night. Excuse me. She had written a pretty darn good blog about art and what is art. And she said, do you think I have talent, Dad? And I said, well, yes, but you've got to write and rewrite and then rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And this book, I know every page went through 6 or 7 rewrites. And so practice, hard work, good editors, and I think anybody who works at it can get someplace in writing, newspapering, nonfiction. But at age... To get back to your question, at age 46, I went to work for the Palm Beach Post. It was really my first job working for someone. But I liked it. I did feature stories. I was the restaurant critic. And in the course of doing...
Did you gain weight?
No, because half the places you go to as a restaurant critic, you don't want to go back to. And a lot of veterans, World War II, Korean War veterans, retired to South Florida, and there were so many stories with these vets of when they were young who parachuted out of a B-24, or their plane crashed, or they were in the Battle of the Bulge, they were at Pearl Harbor. I met a seaman from the Arizona who was on the Arizona at Pearl Harbor, Clyde Coombs.
Oh, my.
And he was in turret number 3, which is the turret that sticks up a little bit out of the water now.
That's why he was still alive then.
Well, of the 1,000 or so men on the ship, I think about 900 or more were killed instantaneously. Those down in the lower turrets had a chance at the stern, and Clyde was there. Most of the Arizona survivors were on shore. In other words, they had the night off Saturday night, December 6th. So when the ship blew up, most of the survivors weren't even on the ship. Anyway, I did these stories, and one of them was about William Manchester, who had served as a Marine on Okinawa in 1945. He was wounded on June 5th of 45, and he had a friend in West Palm Beach, and these old Marines would have reunions, and they had a reunion, but Bill was sick. He couldn't get there, but I did a story anyway, and he liked it. And then 2 years later, after he had had his strokes, the Marines went up to Middletown, Connecticut, where he lived, to cheer him up. His wife of 50 years, Judy, had died that summer, 1998. And I accompanied them and did another feature story. And he liked that one. And then when young John Kennedy died in the plane crash, Manchester had known the family somewhat. And, so I went up there to get his opinion, a little background on John. And Manchester had earned his fame with the death of a president in 1967, the authorized version of the assassination of Jack Kennedy. And so on upcoming anniversaries of the JFK assassination, I'd call Mr. Manchester and get some info. And my daughter was at UMass at the time, so I'd visit her and drop in and see Mr. Manchester, and we became friends over the next 4 or 5 years. On 9/11, of course, no planes were flying. I had a rental car from the Palm Beach airport just by coincidence. I was supposed to turn in that morning. And, in fact, I was at the airport watching Dan Rather when the second tower fell, and I thought, I'm not going to turn the car in. And I called my editor, and I said, I'm on my way to New York.
The newsman went to work.
Yeah. Went to New York, left at, I'd say, noon on the 11th, and got up there. It's about a 22-hour drive. I had to sleep the next day. And in the course of doing that story, I stopped in Middletown to talk to Mr. Manchester about his thoughts and feelings, because we were attacked as we hadn't been since Pearl Harbor. I had a friend in counterterrorism at the FBI in Boston, so I continued up to see him and get his part of the story, because the first 2 planes were hijacked from Logan Airport. Tragedy. So over those months and years, Mr. Manchester and I became friends, and everybody was asking. The New York Times did a front page story, I think it was front page, in August of 2001. That would be just before 9/11, obviously, to the effect that Manchester could not finish the 3rd volume because of the strokes. Oh. And he was sick and had been, and he had writer's block before the strokes. And the frequently asked question at the publisher was, where's the 3rd volume? And I wanted to know where it was. and he told me that it's not going to be, Paul. Nobody's going to write it. That was 2001. I dropped the subject after that. And then when he told the New York Times it's over, I mean, he's on record with the old gray lady that it's not going to happen. Well, I was therefore pretty surprised when on October 9th, 2003, we were watching a Red Sox-Yankees game at his house, late night game. The Sox lost, as usual, and at the end of the game, he turned to me and said, I'd like you to finish the book. And for just the split second, I didn't quite know what he meant. I thought maybe he wanted me to read him a book. He was reading an Elmore Leonard novel. It was open on his bed, and when his mentor, H.L. Mencken, had 2 strokes exactly 50 years earlier, Bill Manchester used to read to Mencken because Mencken couldn't read anymore. So when Bill said, I'd like you to finish the book, for a split second, I thought he wants me to read the Elmore Leonard book to him. Maximum Bob was the title. And he saw the confusion. He said, no, Paul, I want you to write the book. And
well, what did you faint, or did you just kind of go numb?
Well, I remember he was drinking a Jack Daniels. Doctor's orders, he could only have 1, maybe 2 a day.
Sounds like Winston Churchill.
Well, Bill liked his whiskey, not in excess. And so I kidded him. I said, Bill, did you just sneak a couple of Jacks when I wasn't looking? And he said, no, my compass is fully mentis. Or my mentis is fully compass. And he showed me some books and notes, and I got from his office that he hadn't looked at in years on the book, and he said, take these home and write up a sample chapter on the Blitz, and if my agent likes it, my agent has veto power. And 4 months later, his agent liked it, and I started working on the book.
How much volume-wise were these first notes he gave you? I mean, like, was it kind of a notebook full or a case full?
No, it was a suitcase full of maybe 500 or 600 pages of notes, and they weren't handwritten notes. He would Xerox and paste into tablets excerpts from books or speeches or official telegraphs or radio addresses of Churchill's.
Didn't he have as you mentioned in a lecture, I'm going to interrupt you occasionally because
okay.
My mind is whirring all these questions, but you had a lecture here some time ago, and I was privileged to attend. You were talking about some of these things, and you mentioned something about he had a sort of code.
He did. The notes he called them clumps. They were 100-page tablets, like writing tablets, with stuff Xeroxed and pasted in. But he would tape 2 of them together such that it was a 22-inch legal pad, 8.5 by 22, if you will. And he'd bind them himself at the top and then paste where they met. So you'd have these long notes, and he also called them his long notes. And he had about 50 of them, and so they were 100 pages each, actually. And so that's 5,000 pages of these Xeroxes. And he did have a code on the right-hand margin. He would have what he called a source code. And let's say it was an excerpt from Joseph Goebbels' diary. Then the code might be GEO for Goebbels.
And you were supposed to understand that.
Well, yeah, he had lost the key. He had lost the key to the code, and there were about 200 or 300 coded sources. He did have the key on the left margin for his topic code. And if the topic was Churchill's health, for instance, his code might be an RX.
Okay.
But I had the key to that, so that was good. But then I couldn't look at the material and determine I didn't know where it came from. Sometimes I did, because a page might have a title at the top, Averill Harriman's memoir, page 852 or something. But otherwise, without the code. So I took about 2 years and sort of reverse engineered it and tried to. I got a bibliography that he was using, so that gave me a big pot, if you will, of information. But I couldn't match up the bibliography with any specific page in his notes. And so finally I just bought the bibliography. I bought everything in it. I bought all of Churchill's speeches, all of the diaries of all of the players, the Roosevelt correspondence. And I made a U out of 5 farm tables in my office, lined it up with about 200 books and his notes, which I used less and less and less frequently, until finally after year 3 or 4 I was doing it my way. I was using the same sources, mind you, but I understood my process. Bill's notes spoke to him, but they couldn't speak to me. So, for instance, I got a digital version of Churchill's speeches, day by day. So if it's February of 1942 in the story, I can just go to those speeches that month, or go to the Roosevelt telegrams from February, or Goebbels' diary, or Montgomery's diary. And so for each month, for each scene, whether it's Pearl Harbor or the month of March 1943, rather than look through Bill's 5,000 pages of notes, which were not chronological or by topic, I could just go to my stuff and get everything I needed.
You developed your own code.
Yeah, my own method.
Yeah.
And that's what I did for almost 9 years.
How long? I was going to say, how long did it take you to do all this?
9 years. 9 years from the day Bill asked me to almost exactly to the day last November it was published, November of 2012.
Would you do it again?
You asked that question the other day, and that's a moving target. Some days I think, no, I wouldn't. Some days, for instance, the day that the books came in a box to the house, and I signed one to my son Patrick, and that was quite a feeling of accomplishment. And Manchester had given me an opportunity that people would kill for.
Oh yeah.
Some big famous people wanted to write this book.
Right.
So, it's one of those questions. There are days my family gave up a lot, and I missed vacations with my wife and children, and a lot of sacrifice. And there are days I think, I wouldn't have done it again. I'd be in my 10th year since as a restaurant critic.
But what would you have done in those 9 years that would have accomplished what you've... Because as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong. I've been wrong once or twice in my life, so correct me if I'm wrong. You made number 7 on the New York Times bestseller list at one time.
Well, number 5, actually.
Oh, well, I missed that one.
I don't. Too. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for 10 or 12 weeks or more. Did very well. It still is. I've heard from ex-presidents and Canadian prime ministers and senators, former senators, current senators, congressmen, hundreds of just plain readers like me, letters and cards. It's quite gratifying. And when I get that, then sure, it's worth it.
This, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I will anyway. But of all the people you heard from, what one correspondent saying, "Hey, this was great. How did you do it?" Blah blah. What person sent you something that you really thought, "Holy cow! I've heard from so and so."
Gee, no, I hadn't thought of that. I think the letters that come from complete strangers,
like me.
Yeah, that moves me a great deal. I got one letter from someone in Montana, an older lady. I think her husband had fought in the war, and she said something funny about, I don't have internet. In fact, we have kerosene and we live kind of a rustic life out here. And I thought, whoa, she doesn't have internet, she doesn't have electricity.
Yeah.
But that's, she lives that like that. And that was a wonderful letter to get.
I would have written you a note had I not been able to know I'm living right here in town with Paul Reid, who wrote this marvelous book. But because I, too, had a boyfriend in Anzio. And when I read the chapter where the Anzio invasion happened, when the Germans were shooting them down and one of these tanks turned over and he went to see if they were okay. Well, they all got out okay and got into other tanks, but he stepped on a landmine and lost part of his leg. Wow. And I relived that again. And I thought, how many people are reading this book? Because, I've lived 100 years almost, and it just seems like you read something like this and you think, that happened in my lifetime. And that was, seems so. And I mention things to people now, which I'm sure you may occasionally mention something. Who? It's not, oh, really, but, who was that?
Oh, well, especially the younger generation.
Many of the young, but this minute, I'm going to interrupt you again. Many of the young people, the young generation, have you heard any that you know of that were young, of some of the younger generation reading this?
Oh, yes, male and female,
good.
Young men and young women, and that was gratifying to hear. I've given addresses around the country, and invariably there's someone there who grew up in the Blitz, and now she or he is 75 or 80, and they remember the bombs falling in London, and it's remarkable to meet those folks. But also, it's remarkable, I find, to meet someone who's 21 or 2, an American student, or who's reading the book. That's marvelous. This
should be a great book that should be on the must-read list in the colleges. I think our young people are not getting enough of the history of our country, because it affected our country as well as Britain. You wonder how Britain ever survived when you read. Right. And what did you think about Winston Churchill by the time you finished this book? Can you summarize that?
Well, he could be rude and mean and surly, but he was rather busy saving Western civilization.
He never slept.
He did not. He worked. He got 2 work days built into one every day. The way he paced himself. But I really mean that. I think he fought alone for 2 years while we were on the fence. Excuse me, and in so doing, by not losing the war, he won it. Yeah.
There was a loss of lives lost. I felt he made mistakes, as he was only human. But you know what? We're going to. Would you give me the privilege of maybe sometime when you're in town again, we can pick up and go into some other parts of this book. I would love to, because I have zillions of questions. One of them I'll get before we close, and that is, what did you think of his association, his friendship, if I can put it that way, between Churchill and Roosevelt?
I think after the war, Churchill went out of his way to puff that up. That I found that they really weren't friends.
Yeah. I don't think they liked each other very well.
They put up with each other, and Roosevelt could be a pretty nasty guy. He loved to make a joke at other people's expense, and he did so a few times at Churchill's expense. His own friends said that Roosevelt enjoyed seeing other people in uncomfortable situations. So that surprised me, because there's kind of a Hollywood myth of these bosom buddies who loved each other and cried together. And partly Churchill made that up after the war. But during the war, I found it to be a very workmanlike relationship, and it had some flaws. Yeah. They weren't pals.
Yeah. I got that. Well, I read it right then, didn't I? Because I just felt that they didn't like each other, but they got along as long as it didn't harm the end result. They were both trying for the same thing, and so forth. Paul Reid, this has been so much fun, and we just got to do this again.
We'll do part 2.
I tell you what I'll do next time that you agree to talk to my nickname, is Chatterbox. And that's a program I did for 30 years back in Ohio, and I've never outlived it. But next time, I'll bake you a pie. What's your favorite?
Oh, you don't have to bake me a
pie.
No,
I know, but I love to. What's your favorite?
Strawberry rhubarb.
Oh, do I make but I don't put strawberries in mine. I put pineapple, because it's the same texture, and it complements the flavor. Strawberries get lost in the shuffle.
Wow.
So we have some rhubarb growing in our little garden out on many levels.
You don't have
I promise I'm going to make you, and you'll eat it whether you like it or not. But I make a pretty darn good. I call it in papalote. It's made in a paper bag, and. So next time, if you'll agree to meet with me and do this again, we'll do it. Okay?
Yes, we will.
Anyway,
Thank you.
one last word. What would you like to say? Buy your book.
This has been delightful, and we will do it again. And I hope if people listen to this some years from now that they can still track down and find The Last Lion, because Churchill's story. My responsibility was to tell his story. It is not about me or Mr. Manchester.
No.
It's Churchill, and I'm proud to have done it, and hope people continue reading it for a long time.
So check your favorite bookstore, and you have a website they could order online or anything?
I don't have anything that.
No.
No, I mean they can order from Amazon.
Well, I hate computers. I gave mine away when I moved here, but I know they're here to stay. Well, anyway, thank you so much. We're talking to you, as usual, on the website for the Tryon Daily newspaper, which is, of course, the smallest daily newspaper in the world. And we hope to hear from some of you. And let us know if you want to have Paul Reid back, send us some correspondence so that I can present that to him, and he'll agree to come on and talk again about The Last Lion and some of his other career. There's a lot of other interesting things. And one question I'll leave you, I'm not going to have you answer it. We'll answer that next time. Why did you settle in Tryon? Don't have to answer it. We'll get that next time. Anyway, until next time then, we hope all of you have an excellent day. And remember, most importantly, love someone. Thank you.